What's up, guys? My name's Brandon, and welcome back to Apple Weekly. In this episode, we're going to discuss even more new iOS 18 and 18.1 features and changes. We're going to talk about a big change coming to the iPhone's NFC chip, more iPhone SE 4 and iPhone 16 Pro rumors, Apple's next big bet, a crazy AirTag story, and more. And as always, if you enjoy these Apple Weekly episodes, be sure to give this video a thumbs up. All right, so let's start with even more iOS 18 features and changes. So this week we saw iOS 18 Beta 6 get released along with iOS 18.1 Beta 2 for the iPhone 15 Pro and Pro Max devices. So we're going to talk about iOS 18 first, even though there's not really a big difference between the two aside from the Apple Intelligence features. So anyways, the first thing I noticed here on iOS 18 Beta 6 is that we have dark mode for the notification icons, specifically when you lock your device. So when your device is unlocked on the lock screen, you might have light mode icons, but when you lock it and it goes into the always on display mode, the icons turn dark, which I think is awesome. It's something you have to see, and it's like a really cool animation, and it happens so fluidly on the lock screen. So that's something new. We also got a new keyboard splash screen. So this is for the bilingual keyboard. So it now says type English and Spanish in my example, type both languages on the same keyboard, customize in settings. So if you have two different languages added as your keyboard, you will be able to type in both. That's not new, but the splash screen is new. There's also a new banner for vehicle motion cues. So if you turn vehicle motion cues on, you'll see that new banner up top. So the glyph icon looks a little bit different. It's also skinnier and longer than it was before. And if you go ahead and turn that off, you can see it shows up there as well. Looks much better with Beta 6. And then while we're in the control center, you can see that we do now have a standalone Bluetooth control. So that is new in Beta 6. I talked about that in my What's New video, but if you go to add a control under the connectivity section, we now have the option for Bluetooth, and you can resize that in 3 different sizes as well. There's also a slight change in the Maps application when you add a location to your library. So we have Yosemite right here. If I tap on this plus to add it to my library, you can see we kind of have a bouncy effect right there. And if we do it again, you can see there's kind of a bounce effect with that check mark, and everything comes back in. So that's a new animation in Maps with Beta 6. However, not everything is good in iOS 18 Beta 6 because I believe that we have stepped backwards in one category, and that is in the phone application. So if you go into phone, you'll probably notice this right away. If you go to your recents view, we now will call the person if we tap on their name. So if you recall before on previous iOS 18 betas, there was a little call icon over to the right where the I is now, and that would be how you call the person. If you tapped on it, it would just go into that call log or into that contact. So that has been reverted for some reason here in iOS 18 Beta 6. This could be a bug. This very well could be a bug because this is not how it's been for the past few betas, but that is a big step backwards in my opinion in the phone application. Hopefully Apple changes that. And the other reason I think it could be a bug is because if you search for a contact in the Recents tab, you will see that interface that we had in Beta 5 where the call icon is over to the far right. So that interface remains right there. Also down here, you can see this is separated by calls, voicemails, and also contacts down here. So you can search recents by contacts. And perhaps the biggest change in iOS 18 Beta 6 is the ability to have your icon tint change on a per wallpaper basis. So if I go to change my wallpaper, for example, to let's just say this one right here, and you can see that our icons are in light mode instead of dark mode. So in my initial video, I said it only applies to tinting, but it does not. It also applies to if you have dark mode or light mode icons. So for example, if I change this to tinted and we go to let's just say this blue color, and then when we switch to a different wallpaper, it will not only show that they are not tinted, but it's in dark mode. And if I switch to a different wallpaper, a separate one over here, you will see that the icons are in light mode. So basically everything that you customize on a specific wallpaper will stay with that specific wallpaper. And when you create a new one, it will be reset so you can customize it to your liking, which I think is awesome. That's really great customization from Apple here. Now, as far as iOS 18.1 Beta 2 goes, we do have a couple of changes in here, but there wasn't really really too much going on with the second beta of iOS 18.1. And by the way, public beta testers, for some reason, Apple did not push out the latest iOS 18.1 beta for public beta testers. And we'll talk about that in a little bit and why that might be. But anyways, 18.1 beta 2, the first thing I noticed is that the Siri animation, the new UI here, is much more consistent. So every single time that you do it now, it will show the animation, the whole wraparound UI there. Whereas before in beta 1, it would only work like 1 in every 3 tries. So now it works pretty much every single time. And you'll also notice, if you watch this closely, that we have a more bouncy effect. So I'm not the biggest fan of this. I don't like this as much as what we saw with beta 1, but you can see the whole home screen and the icons kind of just, move around. They kind of jiggle around. So I'm not the biggest fan of that. I'm sure Apple will continue tweaking that since we are not even close to the final release yet. And then also somebody on Reddit pointed this out, but the bottom bar in 18.1 beta 2 appears to be smaller and skinnier than it was on previous betas. It's very, very faint. You probably won't notice this, but it is a change. And then also, you know how you can summarize emails in the Mail application now? Well, apparently you can also summarize emails that are not in English. So somebody on Reddit shared this as well, and it basically summarizes a non-English email in English. So kind of a built-in Easter egg to the summarize feature is that it's also a translator. It can also translate that information. Now, before we talk about the performance, the battery life, and what to expect next, let's go into the wallet application, because also this week we got a new state for state IDs. So if you tap on the plus in the wallet and then go to driver's license or state ID, it does not show right now, but soon California will show right there. And that's because Apple just announced that California will be the next state to support digital driver's license and state IDs in the Apple Wallet application on the iPhone and Apple Watch. And this is just the latest addition to California's, rollout for digital IDs, because they did have this last year with the California DMV app. But unlike those third-party applications, this will be built right into your iPhone in the wallet, which is awesome. And it's so much more convenient that way. Now, a lot of people ask me, where can you actually use these digital IDs? Like, yeah, it's cool, but how practical is it? And the main area where you're going to use this is going to be at TSA checkpoints in the airport. However, you can also use this at some local bars, local businesses, and somebody even said at Costco. And somebody on Threads replied to me saying that I live in Colorado where this has been available for a while, and let me just tell you about how convenient this is. Whenever I fly out of Denver, I just tap my phone at TSA and I'm on my way. So that sounds awesome. I cannot wait for this to come to Florida. However, if you're planning on just leaving your physical ID at home, don't plan on doing that anytime soon. Like, you're still going to need your physical ID for government agencies. If the police pull you over, pretty much most businesses are going to require a physical ID. This is going to be a super slow rollout, in the US for digital IDs to be available and, accepted at a broader scale. And then in related news, we also got big news this week from Apple regarding the NFC chip. And this was a bigger deal than I think people realize. So Apple announced that they're going to open up the iPhone's NFC chip to third-party developers, starting with iOS 18.1, a future beta of iOS 18.1. So this is going to use the new NFC and SE, or Secure Enclave, APIs. So 2 brand new APIs from Apple, and this is going to unlock new possibilities for in-store payments, car keys, transit passes, corporate badges, student IDs, home and hotel keys, merchant loyalty cards, event tickets, and even future government IDs. And the reason I said this is bigger than people think is because for certain industries, specifically crypto and Web3, this is a big deal, because you could never use, Apple Pay to tap to send somebody Bitcoin. But now in theory, in these third-party wallet applications that are already out there existing, you're now in theory going to be able to tap to send somebody Bitcoin, or tap to send somebody Ethereum, or tap to send somebody USDC. Like, that's huge for a lot of people. And again, this is not just for transactions either. Like we talked about, this can be for car keys. So certain car makers can have their own built-in, NFC with their phone. So we might start to see a lot more tap to unlock functionality with car manufacturers now. So I just think this is pretty big, and it's going to be really interesting to see what developers do with these new APIs. Now, one thing I wanted to point out as well is that there will be fees associated with this. So it's not just going to be something easy to implement and it's going to be free. eventually, Apple, of course, is going to charge for this. So developers will need to request the new entitlement and also enter into a commercial agreement with Apple. And I did also want to point out that this is different from what the EU already did previously with iOS 17.4, because that used the HCE or host card emulation, and that also does not have any fees associated with it. And that could explain why the EU is not supported or mentioned in this press release, because they do something separate from this. Also, just yesterday on Friday, Epic Games officially launched the Epic Games Store on the iPhone in the EU. So after a nearly 4-year hiatus from the App Store, Fortnite is officially back on the iPhone if you're in the EU. So you will have to download this new application. You can see what the store looks like right here. It shows for iPhones, for Android, everything like that. And if you tap on install on iOS, it will tell you it's only available in the EU. But still, great news if you are a Fortnite player living in the EU and you have an iPhone. Anyways, let's talk about the performance and the battery life here. So performance on iOS 18 Beta 6 has been really solid. And I talked about this in my previous What's New video and also last week in Apple Weekly, but I feel like right now it's fine to have on your daily driver. So if you recall, in my Beta 6 What's New video, I did run into an issue, I did run into a bug, and I left it in the video to show you that, bugs like that do happen, and if you're not okay with that, you should not be installing any beta, for that matter, on your iPhone. But if you're okay with having bugs, you're okay with having minor hiccups and issues, then I think it's perfectly fine at this point to have on your daily device, your main device. So you can see what I scored in Geekbench here on the latest iOS 18 Beta 6, a 2887 on single core, 7181 on the multi-core on my 15 Pro Max. Now, as far as 18.1 and Beta 2, it did score slightly lower on these scores, and I noticed that the performance also is not as good as it is on Beta 6, which makes sense. I mean, it's a Beta 2 versus a Beta 6, that's to be expected, but performance still not great on 18.1 Beta 2. I would still recommend not having that on your main device unless you're okay with having a lot more bugs than what you have on iOS 18.0. Now, as far as the battery life goes, I am running iOS 18 Beta 6 and iOS 18.1 Beta 2 interchangeably. I have two devices that I use, throughout the day on most days. I'm running 18.1 Beta 2 on my main device, the one I use most throughout the day, but I'm also using iOS 18 Beta 6 over here sometimes throughout the day. And I will say the battery life on 18 Beta 6 is pretty good, and I think it's much better than it was in the earlier betas. It's not too much better than Beta 5, but I did notice a slight improvement in battery life. But where I noticed a bigger improvement is with iOS 18.1 Beta 2, because as you guys know, iOS 18.1 Beta 1, the battery life was abysmal. It was awful. It was one of the worst I've seen in a while, and Beta 2, thankfully, gives us a little bit better battery life. It's not crazy, it's not near as good as it is on iOS 18 Beta 6, unfortunately, and that's probably due to the Apple Intelligence features, but I think battery life is a little bit better here on Beta 2, which is a good sign, and that should improve throughout the coming weeks and months. Now, as far as what to expect next from Apple, next week is going to be the week of August 19th. Now, next week, I would expect to see iOS 18 Beta 7 get released. So we're still on a weekly release schedule for at least 2 more weeks, in my opinion. So I do think we'll see Beta 7 next week. And then after that, we should see Beta 8 on the week of August 26th. And then after that, I believe we're going to skip 2 weeks and then get the RC on the week of the 9th. And then, of course, I'm still sticking to my original prediction from months ago for the final release of iOS 18 to be on September 16th. Now, as far as iOS 18.1 goes, here's where it gets a little bit confusing because we did not see the public beta for 18.1 Beta 2 this week, which is very odd from Apple, and that tells me that we are still on a 2-week release schedule, most likely. So I think that we are going to pass on an 18.1 beta next week. I think we're going to see the next beta on the week of August 26th, because keep in mind, Apple is not rushing out 18.1. Like, we're not going to see that until sometime in October. So Apple's not rushing 18.1, especially in the beta phases right now, so we very well could be skipping next week and then return with more betas on the week of the 26th, but we should get that next public beta next week. All right, so now let's move on to the latest Apple news, and let's start with an update on the iPhone 16 Pro colors that we can expect to see next month. So this comes from Sonny Dixon, who posted some updated dummy units for the iPhone 16 Pro, and now it shows the rumored bronze or rose gold color that's going to replace the blue titanium color from last year. And then you can see beside that we have a black iPhone 16 Pro, a white or silver, and then also a gray or natural. Now keep in mind, dummy units never look the best. They never look exactly how the iPhone is going to look. They're really just made to show the broad, general color of the iPhones, and especially for the different buttons on the sides and the camera bump and everything like that. That's really what dummy units are for. They're not meant to be an exact one-to-one representation of what we're going to get. So this looks very brown. I don't expect it in person to actually look super brown. So especially if it's like a rose gold color, it's not going to look like that. But this just gives us an idea that Apple is indeed working on a bronze or kind of a rose gold color, which is exciting. And I think that might be a pretty hot seller since it is the new color. Now, we also got an update on the iPhone SE 4, which this is something I am really looking forward to because now we're hearing that it's most likely going to have Apple Intelligence. So according to Mark Gurman, he said as early as the beginning of 2025, Apple will launch a new iPhone SE, the first upgrade to its low-end phone since 2022. This model will look like an iPhone 14 with a crisper OLED display that stretches across the full device. And you can also bet that it will have Apple Intelligence. So this will be very interesting to see how it compares to the base model iPhone 16, because I think a lot of people, if you only care about Apple Intelligence and you don't really care about the camera, you don't really care about a bigger display, the iPhone SE is going to be by far the best phone to get. So I don't want to sway you away from getting the iPhone 16 because of course the iPhone 16 is going to be much better than the iPhone SE, but I can already see right now that if you're really into Apple Intelligence, that will be the phone to get if you don't care as much about every other detail of the phone. Okay, so now let's talk about Apple's next big bet, their next product category that they're trying to enter. And this is a robot, essentially. It's an iPad with a robotic arm. And we talked about this last month, but there was no context with it. Now we have more details. So according to Bloomberg's Mark Gurman, Apple is prioritizing the development of a tabletop home device that combines an iPad-like display with a robotic arm. And Gurman says that this robotic arm can swivel a full 360 degrees, it can bend, it can tilt up and down, and it can move around on a table. And he says that the device is envisioned as a smart home command center, a video conferencing machine, and remote-controlled home security tool. And he says that it will be controlled primarily by Siri and Apple Intelligence and can respond to commands such as "look at me" by repositioning the screen to focus on the person saying the phrase. Now here's where it gets even more interesting because Gurman says that it's set to launch as early as 2026 or 2027 for around $1,000. So $1,000 for what seems like a beefed up version of the Amazon Echo Show. So I'm very interested to see how this is going to go. Right now, this seems crazy, but I'm sure that it will become more obvious to us in time because again, we're still years out from seeing this actually release. And then finally, just as tradition, we have another crazy AirTag story. So the AirTag stories have really started slowing down over the past, I'd say 6 months or so. So we're still finding more, but just know that they're getting harder to find because they're being pushed out less. I mean, the press is not picking up on them as much because they're happening so frequently. It's not as rare anymore. But anyways, we have another story this time from Reddit. So a Reddit user was on vacation in the south of Italy when he decided to drive an hour to a nearby city. While in that city, he went to a restaurant for some drinks, and after leaving the city and driving back to the villa he was staying in, he realized that he left his travel backpack behind. And this backpack contained thousands of dollars of equipment, including a DJI drone, an Insta360 camera, a GoPro, AirPods Pro, and more. But thankfully, in addition to the AirPods, which also serve as an AirTag themselves, he had 2 other AirTags on that backpack. So he was able to see exactly where it had been left behind, and it was at that restaurant that he stopped at for drinks. So once he realized that, he called the restaurant and asked them to locate his bag and hold it for him. So thankfully for him, he went to the restaurant the next day and found his bag unharmed with everything intact. nothing was stolen. But without the AirTags, and especially without his quick action of calling the restaurant when he realized it, he may have been out of luck. He may have never seen any of those devices ever again. So that's it for this week. If you want to see next week's episode of Apple Weekly, be sure to hit that subscribe button down below. And if you enjoyed this episode, I would appreciate if you gave it a thumbs up. But anyways, guys, thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next week.